生徒会長は私に決まってるから。
お互いに頑張りましょう。
ええ。
Yeah, I think this and South Park have the most accurate depictions of elections. Surprisingly, no Manatsu mouth transition this week. I mean, there was still a recap, though this was at least somewhat justified as they clearly just wanted to show off last week's excellent Sakuga. It did have the inverse effect of making the rest of the episode look bad by comparison, but oh well. Anyway, the episode proper opened with our heroines arriving at school to find someone campaigning for student council president.
生徒会長は一条理香を応援お願いします。
Wait, Ichijo? Nah, not nearly pompous enough. But yeah, she was campaigning to replace the soon-to-be graduating Yuriko, with said prez even endorsing her. Democratic elections were of course new to someone born into a monarchy, which the Precure explained to Laura and gave her an idea.
決めたわ。私生徒会長になる。
This won't end well.
Also, just gonna take a quick peek at the opening, and yep, the chicken is still there and no Lemaire. I would be disappointed if I wasn't totally expecting this at this point. Anyway, Laura did at least have somewhat of a valid reason behind running, as she thought it would be a good first step to getting ready for ascending to her supposed throne. With that, she went to the student council to register her running, and in a nice subtle bit of visual storytelling, we could see Asuka scowl here as Yuriko went to talk with Laura, further hinting at their rocky relationship, which we'll get into more in just a bit. However, before that, we also got to see Laura's direct competition with the return of Toshino Kyoko.
私も生徒会長に立候補しようと思って。
You know Ayano's not gonna be happy about this later, right? Then again, both weren't the favorites to win due to the aforementioned Ichijo being backed by Yuriko. Thus, Laura did what most candidates do and spoke out of her tail fin, shall we say.
生徒会長って名前もどうかと思う。そうね、女王にしましょう。
Wasn't something similar said by some dude from Germany with a tiny mustache? I didn't say his name, okay? Fortunately, these kids didn't buy what this fish was selling. Later, our heroines told Sakuragawa all about this, and Laura assured her that she would pull double duty for the student council and the tropical club. This ended up reminding her of Yuriko doing the same thing with the tennis club, which was news to them, and even more so in the case that Asuka was her doubles partner. Though honestly, I think a lot of us already figured this out, and we're just waiting for confirmation for this stuff. Which, much like the Minori episode from a couple weeks ago, I do have to ask, why is it taking this long to get to this lore? I've been told that the writers have been purposely holding back on all of these developments until the fourth quarter of this show. And where I come from, that sounds like an absolutely backwards way of approaching storytelling. I'm not saying they had to drop all of these developments early into the show, but I also think that they should have peppered it throughout to remind us that there are more main characters than just Manatsu and Laura. But oh well, at least about half of this episode is going to be dedicated to Asuka, giving her some much needed development, and not just more of Laura, who pretty much already got a full arc dedicated to her. Right?
とにかく今は生徒会選挙に集中しましょう。
Nope.
Well, I'll give her this at least. If they pull some kind of twist where Laura becomes the final boss of the series, she already has the perfect evil laugh for the occasion.
なんだ。
We then got some of the standard cliches for these election episodes, with Laura making a ton of empty promises to make herself sound better than her competition. It was a little funny, if a little played out, though the episode also did somewhat avert going all the way with this cliche, as still yet no one was buying what she was selling. This prompted Laura to rethink her strategies, and fortunately her friends, and the writer, were there to help her come up with a few somewhat practical promises. Oh yeah, by the way, this week's writer was Isamu Maruyama, so of course this whole brainstorming scene went into detail about what Laura could do as president. All things considered, it was a pretty fun scene, if only because we got to see our heroines interact off one another, rather than trying to force in some comedy like he's done in the past. I mean, let's face it, his comedy fits in about as well as a big Hollywood cast for a Japanese video game franchise. If I'm kind of indifferent to this casting, but I will say, y'all are wasting way too much of your money on just the voice acting. I mean, a few celebs I can understand, but all of them? How much are you gonna have left over for the actual movie? Elsewhere, an elderly politician with an obvious toupee was sprouting likely some empty platitudes. Y'all are just coming up with your own political jokes, so I won't even bother to try to add to that. I will say, I do kind of admire how Japanese politicians at least bring their own campaign vans. It kind of reminds me of the Lex Express, which Chongie seemed to share my opinion on, and thus decided to use it as the monster of the week. Oh yeah, earlier in the episode, he had gotten the Super Yaneda ball from Butler, who as usual was acting mysterious and all that. Wanting to support their mermaid friend, the original four went ahead to deal with the monster, while Laura delivered her last campaign speech. Okay, I was wrong. This clearly isn't Lex's bus, it's Hogan's. But yeah, the fight this week, while understandably not even coming close to the visual spectacle of last week's, did suffer from the fact that they needed to cut between it and the election. That said, it did also lead into some more good bits of visual storytelling where just through her expressions and gripping her notebook, we could really see Laura regretting not being there for her friends. Thus, realizing she couldn't deliver her speech without the friends who helped her write it up, she decided to put it on hold.
戻ってからたっぷりスピーチを聞かせてあげるわ。楽しみに待ってて。
Gee, imagine if a politician did this on election night. It'd be tame compared to everything else. With that, Laura arrived and dealt a significant blow to the monster that the rest of her team struggled against. Yeah, remind me again, who's supposed to be the primary main character of the show? Anyway, motivation energy was taken back, and they finished it off with the mammoth stamping finish. Yeah, that's what I'm gonna go with. And in a bit of a surprising twist, Ichijo had already won the election. I mean, Laura being disqualified for barely midway through did make sense, but Toshino Kyoko was still there, so they must have counted those votes really fast. Still, whatever the case, the best candidate had clearly won, with even her direct competitor acknowledging this, though personally, I think some of her policies would have been better than Laura's at least. But whatever, the episode ended with one mermaid having had her ego effectively stroked. I guess after the high of last week, it was only appropriate we be brought back down to the standard mediocrity of this show. I mean, alright, this episode was a little above average thanks to Murayama's good writing and some more than decent storyboarding, but other than that, the plot was your standard election episode, with of course the cure not winning out in the end. And other than some slight developments for Asuka that will likely be followed up on next week, this was still largely a skippable affair. Storyboarding this week was handled by one of my favorites, Chiaki Kon, though personally, I think she should also be a director, but even then, she still managed to put together some great bits of visual storytelling, like getting across Laura's anxiousness and the competitive nature between the candidates, as well as between these two. Which yeah, on that note, it was nice to see at least some progression with Asuka's arc that we're clearly going to get some follow-up for next week. That said, it was also mostly relegated to just this brief bit of exposition dumping that probably could have just been told through us visually with a quick flashback or something. This one shot alone already tells us all we really need to know, but instead they spotlight a character who's already gotten the lion, the tiger, and the cheetah's share of development. Thus, there was only so much Isao Murayama's writing could do when these waters have been tread on multiple times now. Great words stew, this was probably one of his better episodes, as there was no forced comedy, plus, let's face it, politics are already a big enough joke as is. And the brainstorming scene was a legitimately good scene between our heroines, but other than that, this was just another election episode that mostly benefited one character who doesn't need any more glorification lest her ego swallows us all whole. Work on the final part of my series review for Gold Princess is well underway. I managed to get a lot done this week, so hopefully it should be out by mid-October or so. From there, I'll try to get out a Halloween video, which won't be this since I've already reviewed this movie a long time ago. Still look forward to it. And until then though, farewell for now my friends, and remember, whoever you end up voting for, just keep it to yourself for your own safety. Get out of here, you stupid pigeon!